We're holding towards the end of the fundamentals of a Jewish home, which we began with the dietary laws, called kashrut, from the very beginning, the very first details that one needs to know. So we went on to family security laws, Tarat HaMishpacha. Now we're holding with the laws concerning Shabbat. What is forbidden to do on Shabbat? There were 39 melachot that we discussed, 39 categories of functions, of jobs that the Torah prohibits, that we learned from what was done in the Mishkan during the time that we had a tabernacle. The various functions that were performed then, those similar functions and all those additional functions that are related are the ones that are prohibited on Shabbat according to the Torah. We have 2 weeks left today and next week where we will be discussing those that are prohibited by rabbinical decree. We discussed some of them before. Now I'm going to get into a little bit more in depth, especially the ones that are very relevant today. Muktzeh and Amidah Le'akum, which I'll explain later on. So before we begin to go through the various ideas, concepts that are prohibited on Shabbat, we need to understand why the rabbis added. Wasn't it enough what the Torah prohibited? As it is, we have quite a few melachot, quite a bit of information to memorize, to remember, to keep in mind at all times. As you know, Shabbat is not easy only because of the vast amount of details. And because of that, the rabbis tell us that whoever does not review the halachot, the rules, on a regular basis, it's very possible for him to make a mistake. So of all the halachot that we have guiding our lives, the one that needs to be reviewed on a regular basis more than anything else is Shabbat. Because of the vast amount of information and details, and some of them are very tricky, trying to figure out if this is mutar or if it's prohibited or not, requires continuous study and review. The rabbis realized, they were very smart, they were divinely inspired, they realized that a Jew may, God forbid, come to transgress something on Shabbat, even though he doesn't intend to do so, only because he either gets confused, he forgets, or he doesn't realize that what he's doing is similar to something else that is prohibited. And they put up safeguards. Imagine if you're going down a hill, and you say to yourself, why do they put up this guardrail on the side? It's blocking my view. But if you think a little bit more into it, you will be thankful to the people, to the city, to all those who put this guardrail in place, because it's a safeguard that you shouldn't fall over. How many stories have we heard of people who crashed into it, and that's what stopped them from going over the hill? There are those, of course, who didn't make it, who went and crashed through it. But that's what it's there for. It's there for a purpose. They tell you to wear hard hats in a construction site so you don't get hit. It's for your safety. It's for our benefit. So when they're giving us additional, it's not to make our life more difficult. Shabbat, by the way, is not difficult. It's beautiful. It's restful once you understand what it's all about, once you try and experience it. Nevertheless, there's a lot of information. But the rabbi said that what the Torah has, not that it's not enough. Of course it's enough. But we must safeguard it for the benefit of the Jew, that he did not come to transgress that which is prohibited according to the Torah, which is very serious. We know that there's a difference between a rabbinic decree and something which is prohibited by Torah. Something which is prohibited outside of the Torah is very serious. One has to be very careful not to transgress it under no circumstance unless his life is in danger for it. That which is prohibited by rabbinical decree is more lenient. Nevertheless, we have to respect it, and we have to treat it in the same way as we treat any other melacha that is prohibited on Shabbat according to the Torah. So the rabbis are instituting gezerot and shvutim on Shabbat, decrees, and shvutim, we would call them additional instructions on how to bring about rest on Shabbat. They wanted us to truly rest on Shabbat. So a shvut comes from the word lishvot, to rest. In order to fulfill the mitzvah on Shabbat of resting, remember Shabbat has 2 ideas: to rest, not to perform work. Even though we are resting by not performing work, they're 2 separate ideas. We cannot do work on Shabbat for one reason, and we also have to accomplish something called lishvot, to rest. To physically rest on Shabbat because it's a spiritual day, a different day, a day that is not like any other day of the week. In order to preserve the sanctity of Shabbat, in order to accomplish what's called resting, the rabbis gave us various shvutim and gezerot in order to accomplish that. Another idea is that the rabbis wanted us to be careful not to transgress the melachot, and they, as I said before, put up a guardrail in order for us not to come to do something which may be easily come about if we are not careful enough, if we don't maintain a distance. Or we might get confused, thinking that this is okay. Since this is okay, I can do this too, because they're both similar, but they may be very different. So in order not to be confused, in order not to come to transgress something which is prohibited by Torah, in order for us to truly achieve rest on Shabbat, for a variety of reasons, they prohibited certain jobs, certain functions. One type of melacha that they prohibited is melachot hadomot la'asurot, those functions that are similar. They're not prohibited, but because they're similar, they're prohibited, at least by rabbinic decree. The typical example is writing with your left hand. To write on Shabbat is a prohibition, but to write with your left hand, not if you're a righty, is not the regular way of doing it. So you might say, okay, that's not really a sur. No, sur, but at least by rabbinic decree, because it's similar, because you're accomplishing almost the same thing, even though it's not being performed in it. Korea, as you know, there's different types of tearing. You can tear something on the seam, and it's something by exact measure, like paper, where it's perforated, that would be a sur. But let's say you just tear to destroy, tear open the bag, for no useful reason, just because you want to just save space or something. That's not a sur midorakan, that's not prohibited by Torah, but it's a sur midorabanan unless you're opening up food, for example, which they permitted. So these, for no good reason, are prohibited by rabbinic decree because they resemble, only because they resemble the real melacha. Other typical examples that we spoke about was Pituyai Esh, somebody's cooking for Shabbat directly on his stove Friday, and he wants to keep that pot of food directly on the stove. It is definitely advisable and encouraged that one cover that fire for a number of reasons. Depending on how cooked the food is already, there was always a possibility, especially in the olden days, because of the types of ovens they had and the method of cooking, that one may come to sear the coals to speed up the cooking process. He's in a hurry, and he might move the coals, he might increase the flame, and of course increasing the flame, making fire in Shabbat is asur. So in order to protect us, to prevent that from happening, he goes, cover the fire, so you don't come to increase the flame. That was the idea of covering the flame. Or climbing a tree. What's wrong with climbing a tree? There's no melacha in climbing it. You're not doing anything. You may come to pick a fruit. You may come to cut a branch. So there's no climbing up the tree. And the same thing with planting a seed in that should be a flower pot that's not perforated. What's the problem with that? That you may come to plant seeds outside. You can't do that. You can't plant seeds. You can't occupy yourself in the work, whether it's a farm or whatever, in that type of job of planting of flowers. And even though this is a flower pot, it's not connected, it's in your house, and it's not a surah according to the Torah, because it resembles the same idea of planting, so even if it's in a flower pot, it's in there. So these are examples of melachot hadomot. They resemble like the ones from the Torah. The rabbis now want us to transgress the real thing. They say, you know what, don't do this because it resembles the real thing. Yeah.
How did you do today, like 15 years ago, maybe a microphone was discovered? How did the rabbis decide the microphone before or job? How did they decide it's a new invention? There has to be some committee or some rabbis to make a decision.
No, we don't need committees. The Torah is in place. The Talmud is in place. So all the concepts and all the rules that we need to know are in place. And we don't adapt to the times. We adapt the times to our rules. So once you are familiar with the rules, you can apply them. Okay, let's see. Electricity did not exist in the past. They had fire, which was made of stone. Today it's easy to turn on the switch. That's not a big job. But remember what I said in the introduction to Shabbat. Shabbat is not necessarily about doing hard physical labor. Taking this table across the room is hard physical labor, but there's no prohibition. I mean, you might need help to do that, but you're not transgressing. This is hard stuff. But taking a napkin outside in the street is prohibited on Shabbat. Carrying, we don't carry. We don't take items with us in our pockets, even though they're light. It's one of the melachot, hosa'ah, piltul, for the reasons that we explained. There's the various details of hosa'ah, the various premises that exist. We don't move things around from one premise to another. But within a home, there's no problem. So it has nothing to do with physical labor. So therefore, in dealing with electricity and new inventions, once we know the rules, what did the rabbis have in mind? They, well, the Torah had in mind, not physical labor, but that we should abstain from certain functions that we do during the week. Shabbat is a special day, it has to be a different day, so we cannot perform those 39 melachot. Otherwise it would be a regular weekday. Therefore, let's take a look at electricity or a microphone. How does it work? What is happening? Right? What is happening as I speak or as I turn on? How do we classify electricity? What kind of a power? Is it similar to fire or not? So there are various opinions, various rabbinical opinions, and quite a bit of literature as what is the status of electricity. But the common denominator is that everybody agrees that it's prohibited because of what it accomplishes. Right? The question is whether it would be rabbinic in nature or whether the Torah would have prohibited. That's already irrelevant because we know if we can't do it, whether it's rabbinic or whether it's prohibited by the Torah. That may be questionable. We hold that for the most part, most things that are electrical, we are stringent. We are stringent because we don't want to take a chance. Right? Let's say it turns out to be that Hashem says, I meant that too. So why take a chance? But there are situations where we can rely on the more lenient opinions in certain situations. Somebody's sick, things like that, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But as a general rule, anything which is new does not mean that we have to. No. It doesn't mean that we have to just ignore it and not think about it and say, oh, the rabbis didn't have this in mind. No, they had everything in mind because they set up the rules and guidelines, and if we know how to apply them, anybody who's knowledgeable can tell you, almost with certainty, what the din, what the halakha, what the ruling will be with anything that ever comes up, because it must resemble, in performance, at least not in nature, but in performance, something that is already prohibited. What is it actually doing? How does it come about? And even if it's not prohibited by the Torah, it would be at least prohibited by rabbinic decree, because it resembles the real thing, turning on the light. Even if it somehow could prove things, that this does not look like fire, still, it's performed, it accomplishes the same thing, and it looks like the real thing. So it's approved at least by rabbinic decree. Alright? So let's go on. We're going to see one of the more popular or more common type of Isur Midrabanan prohibition by rabbinic decree is muktzeh. Muktzeh means something that was not set aside for use on Shabbat, something that we usually have no use for on Shabbat. As soon as Shabbat arrives, we have set our minds away from that. That is not intended to be used. It has no use on Shabbat. So it's muktzeh. Muktzeh means that it's set aside. We don't touch it. We actually don't move it. There's no prohibition touching it. We don't move it around. It's muktzeh. It's meant to be set aside until after Shabbat. It has no use on Shabbat. So there's various types of muktzeh. The idea of muktzeh, the reason the rabbis prohibit us moving things that are muktzeh, is that for various reasons. One reason is that we should not come to do in melacha. If you move certain things around that you ordinarily use during the week, you may come to do something with them that is prohibited. Another one is in order to preserve the sanctity of Shabbat. Just imagine, if there would be no rabbinic decrees, including muktzeh, I can describe to you a Shabbat that looks very similar to the rest of the day, like any day of the week. Imagine getting up morning, on Shabbat morning, and riding a bus, which is prepaid, going to your shop or to your factory, and having those who are not Jewish at the factory doing all the activities that need to be done. You're sitting back and watching. Then you go ahead and get the paper. It's free. Pick up a free paper and to read it. Right? Can you start seeing what is happening? Where's your Shabbat? Even though what I just described, you're not really doing anything that's prohibited according to the Torah. You're not driving the bus. You're getting in a bus that is being driven by somebody else. Right? You're going to work. You're not doing any of the work. You're reading a newspaper. There's not what's wrong with that. But by doing these activities, you are destroying the whole spirit of Shabbat. The rabbis wanted to preserve the sanctity of Shabbat. They wanted us, God forbid, not come to do something which is prohibited in the Torah. They put therefore certain takanot, zerot, that we don't. The Shabbat should be what it should be, what it was intended to be. So one of them is muktzeh. Muktzeh, as I said, is not prohibited to touch. It's prohibited to move only. So a car is muktzeh. We don't use cars on Shabbat. Right? We don't drive them. We don't use them. We don't get in them. Right? But it's not a food to touch or to lean against it. You're not doing anything. Muktzeh the prohibition of muktzeh is just to move it around. To move it, even to pick it up. Okay? But there's no prohibition. Anything that's called muktzeh, we'll see what it is. There's no prohibition in touching or just moving it. So therefore, if you have something sitting on muktzeh, you can take it. There's no problem. Right? Especially because it's sitting on it. Alright, there are two concepts in muktzeh that are important to keep in mind. One is called tiltul bin asad, and the other one is called tiltul kelachar yad. Tiltul bin asad means, even though we just said you can't move something, if it's moved in a backhanded way, that's what kelachar yad is, or min asad. What? Like we've spoken about before, shinui. Shinui means in a changed way, not in an ordinary way. So tiltul bin asad means, let's say you have a coat, and there's money, you left money in your coat. Now we don't use money in Shabbat, right? Money is muktzeh. But you want to wear your coat. Now, there are two problems here. You can't go out to the street with this coat because you'll be carrying it. But there's also muktzeh in the coat. Right, now the question is not the money right now. The money is muktzeh. But what about the coat? Can I move the coat? I need to wear this coat. What should I do now? Right. So you can take the coat and, of course, somewhere empty the content out somewhere. But the question was, can I take the coat to begin with? Well, because I'm taking the coat, I don't intend to take the money. That's called tiltul min hatsad. There's no way for me to get to use this coat unless I somehow move it and empty out the content. Now, if I can empty it out right there, then of course I don't want to move it elsewhere. But if I can't, let's say some money fell into a bowl of candy or chocolate, right? I want to be able to get to the chocolate. This money is, you see what I mean? So I can, and pouring it out may be a problem, because the cookies might break if the chocolate chip cookies or something like, So you have to be familiar with the concept that you may be able to deal with it one way or another by moving it somewhere, or by actually taking the whole thing with you and serving and letting the money stay there if you have no other choice. There's quite a few details involved here, depending if you put the money there intentionally or not. We'll talk about soon. But that's called tiltul min asad. If you're doing it letzorech hadavar hamutar, You're doing it for that thing that is permissible. It's permissible for you to move that post. Permissible for you to move that kiara, that bowl. It's just something interfering. If in any way possible you can shake out that move, you do so. If not, you can move it to a spot where you need that me'il, that code to be, and then over there you can enter the contact. That's titul minatat. Titul kilahar yad means let's say you have some move in the way. You can push it with your foot. That's kilahar yad. It's also a form of shinui. It's not the regular way, it's an unconventional way. You're using your foot instead of your hand. You get it out of the way to serve it, especially if it's a hazard. Right? You're allowed to move it, but you move it with your foot. Kilahar yad would be the best thing to do. So if you have to get some mukta out of the way, do it kilahar yad with your foot. You can blow at it too, right? Blowing at it by you can't use your hand. Okay, tefillin is not really mukta. Not really. Even though we don't use it on Shabbat, and some consider tefillin mukta, if you have to move it for a good reason, you can move it, no problem whatsoever. But you don't just move it around for no reason. Yes, phylacteries. That which we wear on the hand. Yeah. So on Shabbat we don't wear them, or Yom Tov, but they're not exactly mukta, even though they're not worn. So if it's not worn, it's not used. Some say it's mukta, but because of their sanctity and because they're special, and they're not really mukta, they can be worn in a certain situation. If you found them on the street, you don't want to leave one, carry them inside. You would be like a garment. You would be able to wear them and enter. You wouldn't want to leave them on the street. Right, you can carry them, but you can put them on. It's like any hat or shirt that you wear. Right. But because you don't put them on, some say it's mukta, but it's not a real mukta. Because of the special status of what the tefillin is, they say, the authorities say that if there is a real need to move them somewhere, it's okay, you can move them from where they are to another spot. Yeah, we'll talk about it. There's various types of mukta. I didn't talk about the various types of it. It's just the idea of mukta and how there are times that you may be able to move them around by either pushing it or by blowing at it, which is titul kilahar yad. Alright, now let's talk about the various types of mukta. There's different types of mukta for different reasons, and some of them are a little bit different. Mukta mahmad gufo is a typical mukta. Mahmad gufo means its body, its essence, it itself is mukta. It has no use on Shabbat. You don't need it. Why play around with it? Shabbat is special, right? You have other things. You have better things to do. So therefore, don't pick up stones. What are you going to pick up a stone for? A stone is mukta. A branch is mukta. Money is mukta. A broken keli, a broken chair. What are you going to do with a broken chair? Right? Unless there's a use for that broken piece, which we'll talk about later. But otherwise, things that have no use on Shabbat are called mukta mahmad gufo. They themselves, that piece itself, has no use on this day. Therefore, your mind has been set aside from it. You have nothing to do with it. You don't move it around. And the typical examples are stones and branches and broken keli. Another type of mukta is mahmad hisron piece, because you're concerned about it financially. It's something very valuable, stationery paper. You wouldn't use stationery paper to clean your hands, right? A knife of a mohel or a shahet, those who slaughter animals, those who do certain types of children, their knives have to be sharp, and they have to be very careful where they place it, so you shouldn't have any nicks, how do you call it? Nicks, yeah? They have to be very careful, so they are very careful with it. That is shaloit kalkel, it shouldn't get ruined. So anything that you're careful with, and it doesn't have a dual use, you would only use it for something specific, and you're careful with it, that it shouldn't ruin. It's valuable document. Expensive china that is only meant for display and not to be used. These are typical examples of mukta mahmad hisron piece that on Shabbat, you leave alone, you don't move around. Because you're concerned about their particular use, that means they have no use on Shabbat. Right? It's only for that specific use. So it's, in a way, it's similar in concept to what I said before, but you can see the difference. Either way, mukta means your mind has been set aside from it, you have no use for it on Shabbat. Another type of mukta is melachtoli yitur. This one is interesting. The reason why this one is mukta is because what you ordinarily do with it is prohibited on Shabbat. Like a hammer. What are you going to do with a hammer? You're going to knock on nails and build. Construction is a tool Shabbat. You don't build. You don't repair. So this hammer, this tool, is melachtoli yitur. Its real function is to do work on Shabbat. If you don't do work on Shabbat, the hammer is permissible. However, in this type of mukta, there is an exemption. Any mukta which is melachtoli yitur, like a hammer, or a screwdriver, empty pot. Empty pot, you can't cook on Shabbat, or what is it? An empty pot is going to be mukta, right? Pen to write on. You don't write on Shabbat. Any mukta which is mukta because it's melachtoli yitur, there are two exemptions. Exemption number one, if you need a space that is occupying, like a TV set, you don't watch TV, you can't turn on the TV. But you need the room, you just invited some friends, and you need to put a chair here, and this is taking up you shouldn't have a TV to begin with, but that's there anyway, right? So if you're moving it, because you need a spot, that's okay. That's called letoref nekomo. I need that spot. The other exemption is letoref gufo. I want to use it to crack walnut. So now I'm using a hammer to do something which is permissible. I can crack a walnut. So this hammer, even though it's used to do things that are prohibited, but if I start using it for something which I need, which is permissible, like cracking walnuts, I can use the hammer. I can use the scissor to cut, the bakery cake that's in a box that they hide. I need to open it up. I can use the scissors. I ordinarily would use the scissor on Shabbat because what else is it for, right? But if this is for something permissible, I'm cutting something permissible for me to cut, so I can use the scissor too. No, we don't use scissors on Shabbat, right? But there are situations where you may be able to use it if what you're doing is using a scissor instead of a knife, because that's all a scissors really is. It's two knives together. I can use a knife on Shabbat. Why can't I use a scissor? But because the regular function of a scissor is for cutting and doing all of the things that we don't do on Shabbat, if I find an activity that I can do on Shabbat, I can use a scissor. So my first choice is not to use a scissor, would be to use a knife. Yes, that's true. But if I find a permissible use for the hammer or for the scissor, it's perfectly okay. Yeah, sure. The wrapper itself? No. Shabbat, no. Only if you really need what you need is if you have food. Okay? Yeah, otherwise you open your mail too like that. Okay? I'm sure you don't want to open bills on Shabbat, right? So similar idea, only for food. You want to eat it on Shabbat. You can tear it, you can open it, you can use a knife, and this is if there's no knife. So that's because this is used to prohibit the things. If you find a permissible use for it, you have two exemptions. One is permissible use, the other one is I need the spot where it's sitting at. I can't move the hammer because I just want to put it away in the doorway. It's muktzeh. That's it, Shabbat. Put your mind aside, you have no use for that hammer. Don't touch it. Shabbat, right? But I need a spot. I need to put something. I need to set the table. And there's a big something muktzeh on the table. I can move it away, so I need to set the table. No, move it away. Right. Yes. Put it in a more secure place if you have it. Right. Now, if it's a fan or a heater, you can also move it around because you want to get closer to it. Even though that's for you, that's okay to move it around for that reason. Another type of muktzeh is mahmat isura small. Anything which has become prohibited. Let's say somebody by mistake cooked meat with milk, right? You cannot benefit and enjoy a product that has a mixture of meat and milk. You can't eat it, you can't benefit from it. Because you can't eat it, it's not kosher, you can't touch it, you can't move it on Shabbat either. You have no use for it. Frozen food. What are you going to do with frozen food on Shabbat? You can't cook it, right? What are you going to do with it? If you want something that you can defrost and eat it later, that's okay, but otherwise frozen meat. So it's muktzeh. If you have to get into your freezer something that's edible, of course, you move things around, but otherwise these things are muktzeh, you have no use for it on Shabbat. That's called muktzeh mahmat isura asmo, shatneh, a garment that has wool and linen. We can't wear a garment that has wool and linen together. Right? So they have to be checked. The rest of you know this already from Shabbat. You're going to take it to the tailor after the Shabbat to remove it. Right now it's muktzeh, you can't do it, you have no use for it, can't wear it. These are examples of isura asmo. Another example is muktzeh mahmat mi'ut. Okay? I don't think the ladies are going to like this one. Muktzeh mahmat mi'ut. Disgusting. Can't move it around. However, in this situation, there's an exemption. If it's in the kitchen, right, and it's totally not tolerable, the smell of that, you can move it out. Obviously, if it's something which is you can't deal with, but it just doesn't mean. What it really means is that if you sit in your yard, you can't just move it around because you don't like it. Right? Mahmat mi'us means it's disgusting, but if it's in the way, it would be like it would be comparable to a garbage dump, which the rabbis allowed you to get rid of because you can't function properly. So they made an exemption for that. The word muktzeh means that your mind has been set aside to it. In other words, it has nothing to do with it. It has no use for this day, therefore it's off limits. That would be a loosely translated in English, off limits. So that was mahmat mi'us because it's disgusting. Muktzeh mahmat mitzvah. These are additional types, even though they're smaller types, but they're all, you find them from time to time. Muktzeh mahmat mitzvah means like decorations for sukkah. You build your sukkah, you put up decorations. Once you put them up, you can't touch them on Shabbat or Yom. Because they were designated for decorations, for part of the mitzvah, you leave them alone. Even if they fell to the floor, you don't pick them up and put them back on. That's called muktzeh mahmat mitzvah. The sechat, muktzeh mahmat mitzvah. The lulav. On Sukkot, when we have the lulav, the adafim, the aravot, on Shabbat you can't move them because it's muktzeh. You have no use. You don't use them on Shabbat. Only on the holiday. A shofar that we blow on Rosh Hashanah, right? You blow on the shofar. On Shabbat you can't blow. So on Shabbat it's muktzeh. Mahmat mitzvah, because of the mitzvah that is for. It's only for that purpose, not for nothing else. You have no use for it on Shabbat. You can't do. Another quick example of the type of muktzeh which is unique is something called nolav. Nolav means to be born. Something that did not exist before Shabbat, but was born in Shabbat. I'm not going to get into too much into it because it's a little bit related to other halachot. or Yom Tov, and so forth. But nolad means an egg that was laid on Shabbat. We don't eat that egg on Shabbat. Fruit that fell off a tree on Shabbat, we don't eat it on Shabbat. We don't like it, we don't eat it. Milk that was milk, we don't milk the cows on Shabbat, and somehow the milk was milk. We don't drink that milk on Shabbat. That would be prohibited on Shabbat. We're not going to get into the reasons for it now. The only item that I want to point out here is something called ke'en nolad. It's like nolad. A broken vessel. Usually broken vessels have no use, but sometimes the pieces may be useful. You can make a toy. A camera is muktzah on Shabbat, right? You don't take it. A broken camera, a child can use it as a toy. Right? So certain things that have become broken on Shabbat, but they still retain use, they still maintain. There's still something left there. We're more strict on holidays and Yom Tov than we are on Shabbat. On Shabbat, you can take that item, even though it's something new. It's not exactly before it's ke'en nolad, but it still has some use. I can still use it on Shabbat. On Yom Tov, we're a little bit more strict with this. Because in Yom Tov, the rabbis wanted us to be a little bit more careful with mitzvah, certain types of mitzvah, because one may be more lax on the holiday. As it is, the holidays in some ways more lax on Shabbat, because you can cook for that day. You can carry on the holidays. Cooking, of course, only the fire is already lit. So because the holidays are in some ways more lax than in Shabbat, the rabbis were more strict in certain areas, so we shouldn't come to be completely lax. Yeah. That has to do with, first of all, opening an umbrella has a problem with ohel, creating ohel. Well, you're carrying ohel. We're not allowed to erect on Shabbat, a building, whether it's constructing brick by brick, or whether it's assembling something which is pre-assembled, just putting it together. So the rabbis call certain edifices, they call it, they give it a name, the making of a tent. Which it doesn't have to be a tent the way we know tents to be, of fabric. A tent can be a canopy of sorts, because that is a form of building, of construction. Right. Yeah, so any edifice would be prohibited on Shabbat. Ohel, yeah. Ohel means a tent, but a tent doesn't necessarily have to be made of fabric. It could be any canopy, any covering. But the umbrella has... Right. It's still moved because it's not made to that way. Alright, we have, the next one is very important. An important category of books is called basis ledavar asur. Basis, like the English word base. You know, a lot of words, many languages stem and come from Hebrew. And here you have a good example. Basis means base. Something can become a base to something muktzah, sitting on top of it, and as a result of becoming a base, Friday evening, it in itself becomes muktzah too. Typical example would be lighting candles on the table. You take your candelabra, right? You light the candles. Once the candles are lit, they're muktzah. But not only are the candles muktzah, even though they're extinguished now, anything, the candle holder, the candelabra itself, and the table has become a basis ledavar ha'asur, and so the table becomes muktzah. That is why we have a custom, Friday afternoon, to place on the table, before the candles are lit, the challah, right, the bread, because now the table becomes a base for not just candles, for additional things that are permissible for me to use and move in Shabbat. The challah, I'm going to be eating that. A drawer, you can have money in the drawer. Can I open the door? The door is a basis. It's something that's muktzah. But that drawer has my prayer book, has my siddur. That drawer has other things that I can use in Shabbat. As long as those things are important, that means that is a base for things that are permissible and things that are prohibited, and that's okay. But otherwise, if something is a basis, you're going to have a problem. Let's say somebody left money on your pillow. So that pillow is a basis. But we're going to see that with basis, it's not so simple. It all depends why it was left there and who left it there. If it wasn't you who left the money there, then that object, that base, is not become a basis. It has to have been that you left it there. So number one, it can't be somebody else, it has to be you. Number two, it has to be that you intentionally left it there Friday, knowingly you wanted it to be there. We knowingly are lighting the candles on the table. So if you ever have to move the table, usually we don't move the table anyway. But let's say you have to make room. Well, if you had your chalot there, you had other things there before Shabbat, then it's okay. But otherwise, you would not be able to move the table around if you had to. So number one, it has to be that you did it. Number two, it has to be that you intentionally, knowingly put that there. If you forgot, you put money in your pocket Tuesday, you forgot to remove it Friday, that taking would not exactly be a basis. That is why we said before, you can take it and shake out the money. Otherwise, why should you be able to shake out the money and move the bag into the coat? It's a basis. But you did not intentionally put it there Friday afternoon for it to be there Shabbat. You left it there on Tuesday. You just forgot to take it off. Or it was beli kavanah. Somehow it fell there. Also, that does not make it a basis. So basically, basis means that you intentionally, knowingly, put it there right before Shabbat for it to be there on Shabbat. If you put it there, but you intended to remove it before Shabbat, you just forgot, then it's not a basis. But you still would have to shake it off. Shake off the pillow, so the money should fall down to the floor. The money is moving. You know what I mean? That is why we put the challah, because then it becomes a base for things that are permissible And for things that are asur, that's okay for me to move the table there. Some say that the derech hakrai, if you put just temporarily something, you didn't mean it to be there for too long, it doesn't become a vasis too. That's called the derech hakrai. Yeah, you yourself. So you're putting it intentionally there, but you meant it to be there temporarily. You didn't mean to leave it there. And for some time you meant for it to be there, but not permanently, then it would be okay. Just a few more comments before we go to Rabbi Elyahu Kin. There's something called Migoydit Katai. Once something has become muktzeh at the beginning of Shabbat, even though somehow later in Shabbat it's no longer muktzeh, in other words, the muktzeh has disappeared, it still continues to be muktzeh. The typical example is Yisar Etuva, wet laundry. Wet laundry on Erev Shabbat, right before Shabbat, if it's wet, is muktzeh on Shabbat. Rabbis didn't want us to handle it because we may come to squeeze it. Squeezing wet clothing is a form of laundering, and we don't launder clothes on Shabbat. So we don't want to come to that. We're going to make it muktzeh. But eventually it's going to dry, right? So Rabbi said, no, we go to katsai. Once it has become muktzeh at one given moment at the entrance of Shabbat, we say that it's muktzeh for the remaining portion of Shabbat. Even if it's already dry, once it has become muktzeh at one moment, it stays muktzeh later on. Basis, ledavar asur, is another example. We just spoke about base. Even though whatever was on the base is already no longer there somehow, but that base continues to be muktzeh. That fell off this sukkah, even though it's no longer on the sukkah, it's a chat, it's still muktzeh. Once something has become muktzeh even for a few minutes, it continues to be muktzeh for the remaining part of Shabbat. We spoke about the first type of muktzeh was a muktzeh machmat gufo. Remember, sticks, stones. The reason why they're muktzeh is because they themselves have no use on Shabbat. There is a way that you can use them on Shabbat. If before Shabbat you say, I'm going to use that brick for support. I'm going to use it for something on Shabbat that I really need, something that's permissible. I'm going to use that stick as a cane, right? I'm going to use that which is muktzeh machmat gufo for a permissible use. So before Shabbat you say to yourself in your mind, you don't have to actually take it and set it aside, but you have to be miya'ed, you have to designate it for, I'm going to use this on Shabbat. Then you can use a stick or a stone, but you designate it before Shabbat for some permissible use. There are many uses for bricks, as a bench to hold up something, to keep a door open, right? So therefore on Shabbat I can move it around because I set it aside, I designated this for permissible use. Now if it's going to be temporary, not permanent, some say, they explain that you have to actually do something with it, you can't just think about it. It's going to be a stick that's going to make it into a temporary cane and you have to rub it or show that you're preparing it. But otherwise the machshava alone is sufficient. Just thinking about it, that you are designating this type of muktzeh for Shabbat, for permissible use, then it's okay. It's not muktzeh then. Because you prepared it for Shabbat. Because something which is muktzeh means it's unprepared for Shabbat. It has no use on Shabbat. But this thing is going to have a use, a permissible use. Okay. As long as you think about it before Shabbat, you say, I'm going to designate this for use on Shabbat, then you are removing the muktzeh from it. Right? Yeah, soccer ball is not muktzeh. Playing, yeah. We'll talk about that next week. Yeah, those are the issues that are more related to next week. If it's going to be temporary, it's not a permanent. It's a temporary use. You have to do more of a maaseh than machshava. Okay, so we covered muktzeh. Yeah.
Let's say you get something like an article like this. So, an article is fine. You can take to a step, body is it's okay. How do we relate to something like that? Is it a conflict? Is it muktzeh? It's part of it.
Yeah, so one second, so what's the question?
The question is it muktzeh? You came into a house owned by a foreign person you get,
no,
you touched it.
I'm going to talk about it. That's the last item I'm going to talk about. Things that are prohibited to you, but not to someone else. Because one is more strict than the other. So we'll talk about it towards the end. That's the last item. Alright, the next subject, which is by rabbinic decree, is Rabbi Elyahu Kin, is asking a favor to somebody who's not Jewish. Since he's not commanded to rest on Saturday, can you do me a favor, and do something for me that's prohibited for me? This is a big area. So remember, what's the idea of Shabbat? Shabbat is a day of rest. So you can easily defeat that purpose by perhaps involving other people who, for them, it's not prohibited to do. Right? A non-Jew does not have to rest on Shabbat. Now, that's not his commandment. They have 7 commandments, basic commandments, that they need to keep. And if they keep them, because God commanded so, they have a chelek l'olam haba, they have a share to the world to come. They don't have to do all the 613. That only belongs to the Jewish people. They have a certain responsibility, the Jewish people, which they need to perform. by fulfilling the 650 commandments. A non-Jew doesn't have to do that. So one of the things he doesn't have to do is the rest of Shabbat, and he's not commanded to do so. Okay, good. Maybe we use him. But if you use him, what's going to happen? You're going to defeat the whole purpose of Shabbat. Because somehow that work is going to be done for you. He's going to cook for you. He's going to do this for you. He's going to do that for you. So the rabbis, of course, said that the number one reason why you can't, I'm going to call it number one reason, why you can't use a goy to do the work for you on Shabbat is because of shlichut. I saw three explanations. Shlichut means you're making him a messenger. When you make somebody your messenger, and he does something for you, it is as though you did it. Even though he performed it, but it counts as though you did it. Imagine you hire a killer. Even though that individual is responsible for his own deeds, if he's mature, right? Because as the rabbis tell us, En shliach ledvar avera. You cannot make a shaliach, you cannot make a messenger to commit a sin. What that means is that the man who committed the sin is responsible. He killed, so he's responsible. On the other hand, you did something. You hired him. You definitely did a ma'aseh. You did not kill, but you definitely did something. That's important, because shlichut, creating or making a messenger, means that somehow you are tied to that individual, and it is as though you did it. This is especially true, not in an avirah, in a sin, but in a mitzvah, or in anything which is not an avirah. It is considered as though you did it. If he did it, it is considered as though you did it. Right? So therefore, here too, even though it's not the same, you didn't do it. You say, I didn't do it. But the job was done, the work was performed. So where's the Shabbat? As the Pasuk says, Lo ye'aseh melacha, no work shall be done, either by you or by your animal. And you can infer from that it also means any work done for you by others. So even though there's no prohibition according to the Torah, you're not transgressing a prohibition written in the Torah because you're not doing it yourself. The Shabbat is disappearing. In other words, everything is going to be done for you. Where is there going to be the Shabbat? The shlichut is one idea of why you cannot employ somebody who's not Jewish to do a favor for you in Shabbat. Another idea is lo yakel b'melacha. You should not become lax and lenient. If you allow somebody else to do it, it's not so bad. It's not the end of the world. He did it. You may come to easily forget the seriousness, the severity of this issur, this prohibition. And the third idea is the prophets say that Shabbat is so holy, but in order to preserve the sanctity of Shabbat, it is important also to not talk about things that are not related to Shabbat. Don't talk about politics. What does that have to do with Shabbat? It's not prohibited, but the rabbis tell us, the prophets actually emphasize, that don't talk or don't do things that have nothing to do with Shabbat. By doing things that did not only mean melachot, work, which is prohibited by Torah, they also meant things that are not prohibited, like reading newspaper. What does that have to do with Shabbat? Especially the sports section. The business section, you definitely don't want to read because you're going to get a nervous breakdown, and you don't want to have that on Shabbat. So these are things you don't do on Shabbat. It's not prohibited by the Torah, but it takes away from the spirit of Shabbat. So for all these reasons, asking somebody who's not Jewish to do it for you, you're going to talk about it. You're going to be involved in it. You're going to be instructing it. That's the basic explanation of why we can't use somebody who's not Jewish. He's not commanded. Okay, you're not doing it, but still, it's going to be done. The spirit of Shabbat is going to be taken away. Yes, Shaliach. Shaliach. Well, I'm going to talk about it. So that's the basic idea of why we can't use somebody, even though he's not Jewish and he's not commanded. It goes against the whole spirit of Shabbat. When we're talking about telling somebody who's not Jewish to do something, we mean two things. When we instruct them, even if we do not benefit from it, the fact that we are instructing is also prohibited, even though we're not directly benefiting. What he's about to do, we're not going to benefit from. Take care of this for me. There's no real direct benefit. It can be. There are things that that individual can do, but there will be no direct benefit. But still, because I'm instructing him to do it, and I can't do it, it's a sur. Or the second aspect is something that was done for me even without instruction. The non-Jew went ahead and did something for me, even though I did not instruct him. I cannot benefit from that on Shabbat. Like if you turn on the light for me. Right, exactly. Yeah. You cannot benefit. You cannot sit in the room. But I'm going to talk about it, when and how. Okay. So this is the idea. The idea is not instructing, and even if you did not instruct, not benefiting. So we have not instructing as one aspect, one idea. The second idea is not benefiting. We don't want to benefit from it. If you start benefiting from this, you're going to continue to do it. Oh, this is easy. This is good. Right? Especially if it's for free. So the first example I wrote here is light. If the room is pitch dark, there's no other light, and he turns on the light, you can't tell him to turn on the light. Even if he did it on his own, you can't sit in the room. You cannot benefit from work that was done for you on Shabbat. However, if there is already light, there's some illumination of the room, and he adds a little bit more light, and it's okay. That's number one. So the number one possibility where that can work, that if he did something for you, is that there was already light, so he did not make too much of a change, too much of a difference. That's permissible. Number two exception is that he's doing it for himself. You're both sharing the same room somehow, and he wants to turn on the light. He's not doing it for you. He wants to do it for himself. You can be in that room. He's doing it for him. He's not doing it for you. That's okay too. You can be there. You don't have to walk out. He's not doing it for you. He's doing it for himself. However, if it comes to extinguishing the light, it's a little bit more lenient. Let's say the child can't sleep. Let's say the alarm bell, right, is going off. It's going to be a big problem, big bother. So you could indirectly hint that this is a problem. The child is not going to fall asleep with this light on. And if he does it on his own, it's permissible. Yeah. Now the reason why this is okay, even though you can't just hint. People think you can just hint. Don't tell them directly. Hint. No. Hinting does not work. Unless it's in a situation where something is being done indirectly. Indirectly means you're not benefiting from it directly. Are you benefiting from light that's extinguished? No. Extinguishing the light is just removing something that was bothering you there. You're not actually receiving something. It's removing something that was a problem. Removing the noise from the alarm clock. Removing the light that was there. Even though that you can't extinguish either, in this kind of situation when you don't tell them directly, it would be permissible. It's called an indirect benefit. Well, no, not exactly. Depending on the circumstances, certain things might be permissible and certain things not. I gave you the example of the light and the alarm clock. But it doesn't mean that you can use it across the board for everything. Some say, by the way, that in certain situations, you can ask a friend of you, the non-Jew, for example, to tell another non-Jew. So you're employing two. But that's only if there's a great need, like a mitzvah, a tremendous need in the house, but we don't rely on that ultimately. It doesn't make a difference how many you tell, you still instruct them. Okay, the typical examples of when you can ask your friend who's not Jewish to do something for you. Let's say you have a neighbor who does a lot of favors for you, and your child is sick, has high fever, you need to buy medicine. You ran out of a Tylenol. You can ask him, can you please buy me medicine? Because high temperature, children, that's dangerous. Even though he may not be gravely ill, but then you can take a child yourself if there's a sakana de. If we're talking about immediate danger to one's life, you yourself take the child to the hospital. You don't even call the ambulance. You yourself go, because your life comes first, right? The mitzvah, sure. But gravely, let's not call it gravely, very, very sick, not just a headache. Because if it's just a headache, you don't bother asking or something like that. But if it's very sick, and we went through the various categories of illnesses, of what's called very sick, flu, migraine headaches, broken arms, things like that, of where this would be a typical example where you can ask a favor from your non-Jewish neighbor. The other example is the Torah Rabbi Mitzvah, big congregation, the lights are out, it's complete dark. You have to say Kol Nidrei, Yom Kippur, right? You won't be able to read. You can ask them that. Or it's very, very hot. You turn on the air conditioning. So what you have here is the Tzorech Rabim. It's not the Tzorech Yachid. It's not for one individual. It's for many. And especially if it's the Tzorech Mitzvah, for a Mitzvah. Now, the Tzorech Mitzvah for an individual, you can't. But for many, for the public, you can. The only time you can do it with Tzorech Yachid, the Mitzvah, is if it's Shvut, the Shvut. Shvut the Shvut means you're asking the non-Jew to do you a favor which is only prohibited by rabbinic decree. To carry something over from one yard to another. Can you get me the Siddur? I need a Siddur. So it's an important thing that you need. And it's only from carrying from yard to yard without Niruv. It's only by rabbinic decree prohibited. That's okay, that's sort of mitzvah. But otherwise, you can't ask for personal favors for you, even if there's a great need, unless it's the sort of rabbin. Or, of course, if somebody is sick. So these are situations where you can use. There are situations you can use, and you have to keep in mind that there are not that many. Somebody's sick, big mitzvah for the sort of rabbin, or if it's a situation where it's an indirect benefit. It's not a direct benefit. That's to extinguish the light by the hand. Okay, real quickly, the last few items are contractors and employees. If you hire a contractor to do work for you, because you're not telling him when to do the work, as long as you don't tell him do it on Saturday, I'm picking it up Saturday night. I bring it to you Friday night, get it done Saturday night. That means you're telling him to do it Saturday. That you can't do. If he does it whenever he does it on his own, it's okay. An employee you can't hire because you're hiring on a daily basis, on an hourly basis. That you can't do. You can't have employees doing for you work at Shabbat, paying them by the hour. But if you don't pay somebody by the hour, you're paying him for the job done, whether it's the cleaners, whether it's the contractor, he does it whenever he wants. He's not telling him, as long as you don't tell him to do it on Shabbat. And as long as it's not your house, where people can see that he's working in your house. That you can't. You can't let somebody remodel or build your home on Shabbat. Car, mechanic, he wants to work it on the Shabbat, it's okay. As long as it's not in the neighborhood where everybody recognizes, oh no, the guy's working on the rabbi's car there. That's the rabbi's car. But they might think he instructed him to do the work at Shabbat. But otherwise, if he does it on his own, if he wants to do it on Shabbat, let him do it. That's called kablanut, as opposed to schir yom. Schir yom, which is in the Torah, is a problem when you have maids. Maids can't do anything for you. They can, the cleaning, anything which is not prohibited on Shabbat, they can do. But vacuum cleaners, doing things which are prohibited, they shouldn't do, because there's also marit ayin involved. Marit ayin means people might think that you're the one who's doing the work, or it's permissible. So if it's not something that's prohibited, they can still do the cleaning. And even though you're paying them for Shabbat, you're really paying them for a whole week. So that's okay. The last idea that I want to talk about is, well, with maids, if she turns on the hot water for herself, it's okay to want to. Something like that is okay. But otherwise, you can't ask her, or she can't do for you something which is prohibited on Shabbat. People who have partnerships with non-Jews, people who have a store and that needs to be open all the time, it's a big problem. There are a lot of details on how to handle a partnership with somebody who wants to keep the shop open on Shabbat. So I'm not going to get into all the details. If you ever have a situation, it has to be analyzed. And there are ways to do it, but it's not simple.